If you've ever felt thrown away by the very people who were supposed to protect you, this story is for you. Subscribe so you never miss a story that reminds you what one brave decision can do to an entire life. The morning Leila Voss was thrown out, the sky was the kind of pale gray that offers no comfort. She stood at the edge of a cracked concrete driveway with a single canvas duffel bag at her feet, the door already closed behind her. 21 years old, and the only family she had left had just told her to go find somewhere else to exist. No warning, no apology, just a locked door and the silence that followed it. She picked up her bag. She started walking. She had no idea where she was going, and for the first time in her life, no one was going to tell her either. The road she found herself on was not a road most people used anymore. It curved gently through low farmland outside a town called Dressler, a place so small it barely appeared on maps and barely remembered itself. Leila had passed through once years ago with her uncle, back when things were different, back when she still believed family was something permanent. She remembered very little about it except the smell of wet grass and the way the hills rolled like sleeping animals. She did not know why her feet carried her toward it now. Sometimes the body remembers safety even when the mind has forgotten it. She had walked nearly 4 kilometers when she saw the structure. It sat just off the road behind a crooked iron gate half buried in tall weeds. A small stone building no bigger than a garden shed stretched slightly taller, with a peaked roof patched in places with rusted tin and missing completely in others. The windows were dark hollows. Vines had wrapped themselves around the entire eastern wall so completely that the stone beneath was barely visible. A faded wooden sign nailed to the gatepost read, "Property seized. Auctioned for $1." Someone had drawn a laughing face beneath the words in marker, then crossed it out. Leila stopped walking. She stared at the sign for a long time. $1. She counted the money in the outer pocket of her duffel bag. She had exactly $1.17, because she had refused to touch the money in the inner pocket. That inner pocket held $12, and she had decided weeks ago that $12 was her emergency reserve, the kind you do not spend unless everything else has already failed. She looked at the stone building. She looked at the sign. She thought about the locked door behind her. Then she picked up her bag and walked toward the iron gate. The auction office turned out to be a small municipal annex attached to the back of Dressler's post office, staffed by a tired-looking man named Oscar, who seemed genuinely surprised anyone had come in at all. He explained that the tollhouse, as he called it, had been seized from a deceased estate with no living claimants, that it had been sitting in limbo for 11 years, and that the county simply wanted it off the books. The $1 price was not a mistake. It was desperation dressed up in paperwork. Leila placed her coin on the counter. Oscar stamped a form. She walked out holding a deed. The first night was brutal in every sense of the word. The floor was stone, and the cold came up through it like the ground itself was breathing. One section of the roof over what might once have been a sleeping alcove had failed entirely, and the night sky was visible through the gap, indifferent and vast. Leila unrolled the single jacket she had packed, pressed it against the least damp section of wall, and sat with her back to the stone. She did not sleep. She listened to the building settle around her, its ancient timber bones creaking, and she told herself that she had made a reasonable decision. She was not entirely convinced. By the second morning, she had assessed the building with the careful eyes of someone who had grown up helping her uncle patch roofs and repoint brickwork for extra money. The structure itself was sound. The stone walls were thick and honest, the mortar crumbling in places but not compromised. The timber frame supporting the roof had rot in 2 beams, but was otherwise intact. The original function of the building, she learned from a local library pamphlet she found wedged under a stone inside, was as a toll collection point on a road that had been rerouted over a century earlier. The building had been used as a residence after that, then abandoned, then forgotten. In the town, people noticed her almost immediately. Dressler was not a place where strangers went unobserved. She bought basic supplies with careful precision and heard the whispers before she was even out of the hardware shop. An older woman named Frida, who ran the small grocery, spoke to her directly rather than around her. "You're the one who bought the Haas place," Frida said, not as a question. Leila told her yes. Frida made a sound that was not quite disapproval, but was not encouragement either. "People don't stay long in that house," she said. "Nobody has, not in years. Not since the last one left in the middle of the night." Leila asked who the last one was. Frida looked at her the way people look at someone they've decided is too young to understand something, then apparently changed her mind. A man named Benedict, she said. He bought it cheaply after it was abandoned the first time, maybe 30 years ago now. He was fixing it up the same way you're apparently planning to. Then one winter, he just wasn't there anymore. Left everything. His tools, his food, his coat. The door was standing open. Nobody ever found out why he left or where he went. Leila nodded slowly. She bought her supplies and went back to work. The weeks that followed were defined by physical labor and a quiet, stubborn rhythm. She cleared the interior of debris accumulated over decades. She patched the roof with materials she sourced cheaply by asking at the salvage yard outside town, a place run by a taciturn man named Patur who initially charged her full price and then, after watching her haul timber herself without complaint, began setting things aside for her at no cost. She replastered a section of the interior wall near the entrance. She replaced a rotted window frame. The building was slowly becoming something other than a ruin, and as it changed, so did something in her. She had been there for nearly 6 weeks when the strange thing happened with the wall. It was late evening, past the point where the light through the patched windows was useful, and she was working by lantern near the interior north wall. The wall there had a section of plaster that had bubbled and cracked from moisture penetration behind it, and she had been trying for days to trace where the water was entering. She pulled away a section of rotted plaster with her hands, then used her hammer to clear the debris and struck the stone behind it. The sound that came back was wrong. Not a dull thud. Something hollow. She stopped. She tapped the stone again, more deliberately this time, moving the hammer across the surface in a slow grid. The hollow section was roughly half a meter square, set back from the main wall plane in a way that was only visible once the plaster was gone. The stones framing it were fitted differently, more carefully, not the rough, random coursing of the surrounding wall, but something almost deliberate. She looked at it for a long time. Then she went and found her pry bar. The stones came loose more easily than they should have, which told her they had been placed to be removed. Behind them was a small cavity, dry and sealed by the surrounding stone, perhaps 30 centimeters deep and wide enough to hold a single object. That object was a rectangular metal box, roughly the size of a large book, its surface mottled with old rust, but its seams still tight. She lifted it out. It was heavier than she expected. She sat down on the cold floor with it in her lap and did not open it for several minutes, because something about the weight of it told her that whatever was inside had been waiting a long time and deserved a moment of stillness before it was disturbed. Inside the box, beneath a layer of wax cloth that had kept the contents dry despite the decades, were 3 categories of things. The first was a bundle of handwritten letters tied with twine, so old it crumbled when she touched it. The second was a folded set of papers that, when she carefully spread them on the floor and brought her lantern close, turned out to be property deeds, several of them, with different dates and different names, but all referencing land in and around the Dressler area. The third was a small leather journal, its cover cracked but its pages intact, dense with handwriting in a script that took her some time to decipher. The journal belonged to a woman named Antje. The name appeared on the first page in careful letters, followed by a date from nearly 70 years earlier. The writing inside was not dramatic. It was precise and observational, the kind of record kept by someone who expected the world to try to erase them and had decided to leave evidence anyway. Leila read for 3 hours without stopping. By the time she set the journal down, her hands were trembling slightly and the lantern had burned low, and she understood that the story she had stumbled into was larger than anything she had imagined when she placed $1 on a municipal counter. Antje, according to the journal, had been the rightful owner of the toll house and a significant parcel of surrounding land that she had inherited from her father. She had been a single woman in a time when that status made a person vulnerable to a particular kind of legal predation. A group of men in Dressler, connected through business and local government, had spent years constructing a fraudulent claim against her land, manipulating records, pressuring officials, and finally, when those methods were not fast enough, making it known that continuing to resist would be personally dangerous. Antje had not run. She had hidden. She had taken the evidence she had gathered against them, the deeds that proved her true ownership, the letters that documented the threats and bribes, and she had sealed them inside the wall of the only building she was certain they would not dare demolish, because demolishing it would draw attention they did not want. Then she had vanished. The journal's final entry was dated a week before the records in Dressler showed her officially listed as departed, whereabouts unknown. The entry said only this: "I have left the truth in the wall. I trust the house to keep it until someone worthy finds it. I am not leaving. I am going somewhere they cannot follow." This is not an ending. Leila sat with that sentence for a long time. She read it again. Then she looked around at the stone wall she had been slowly restoring, and she thought about what it meant to protect something by appearing to abandon it. She thought about the word worthy. She did not know yet if she was, but she decided to act as if she might be, because it was the only direction that felt honest. She began carefully, the way she had learned to do everything since arriving at this building. She photographed each document with the camera on her phone before she touched anything else. She made a handwritten inventory of everything in the box. She researched property records at the county office in the nearest larger town, where the archivist, a meticulous young man named Silvio, helped her cross-reference the deeds with historical land registry records without asking why she needed the information, which she appreciated. What she found confirmed what the journal claimed. The land described in Antje's documents included not only the toll house, but a strip of territory running along the old road corridor that, through subsequent rezoning, now held significant value. She had been back in Dressler for 2 days after her visit to the county office when the first stranger appeared. He was well-dressed in a way that was slightly wrong for the countryside, the kind of clothes that signaled money without acknowledging mud, and he knocked on her gate post and introduced himself as a representative of a regional land development company. He said he had heard she was doing renovation work and wondered if she had considered selling, given the challenging condition of the property. He named a figure that was generous enough to be suspicious. Leila told him politely that she was not interested. He left a card and said he hoped she would reconsider. 3 days later, a second visitor came. This one did not bother with politeness. She was a woman, angular and precise, who identified herself as representing a legal firm that had apparently existed in the region for several generations, and she informed Leila that there were, in her words, unresolved questions about the provenance of the toll house's original seizure. She suggested that Leila's ownership might be, and she used this word carefully, complicated. Leila looked at her for a moment and then asked her to spell the name of her firm. The woman did. Leila recognized one of the surnames from the letters in Antje's box. She did not show any reaction. She thanked the woman for her visit. She said she would look into the matter. She watched the car drive away and then went inside and sat very quietly for a while, working through what she now understood. The network that had worked against Antje had not dissolved. It had evolved, passed down through families and firms the way assets pass, carefully and with the assumption that the original crime had been safely buried. They had not known about the box. Now, somehow, they suspected someone had found something. Silvio, the archivist, turned out to be more useful than Leila had expected. She called him and described what she had found without revealing the specific documents, and asked whether there were any existing legal mechanisms for recovering land title based on historical fraud. He was quiet for a moment and then said, with the careful neutrality of someone trying not to sound excited, that there were precedents, that the relevant question was the age of the documentation and the nature of the evidence, and that if the original fraud had been systematic enough, it might fall under statutes that had no expiration. He said she should find an attorney who specialized in historical property claims. The attorney Leila found was named Dagmar, a small, fierce woman in her late 50s who practiced out of an office that smelled of old paper and strong coffee, and who listened to Leila's account of the documents without interrupting once. When Leila finished, Dagmar sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she said that the case was genuinely unusual, that the documentation as described sounded potentially very significant, and that if the evidence held up under examination, the implications would extend well beyond the toll house itself, touching multiple properties that had changed hands since the original fraudulent transfers. She also said that Leila should be careful, because people did not hire expensive legal representatives to make polite requests unless something large was at stake. The threats, when they escalated, were not dramatic. They were the quiet kind, the kind that left no clear fingerprints. Her gate was damaged overnight. A section of roof she had repaired was found pulled apart the following morning. A note appeared under her door written in plain block letters suggesting she was in over her head and would be better off taking the generous offer that had already been extended. Leila photographed everything. She sent the photographs to Dagmar. She repaired the roof section again, this time reinforcing it. She also called Frida at the grocery and asked her if she knew anyone in town who might have known Antje personally, who might still be alive. Frida was quiet on the phone for a moment. Then she said there was one person. An elderly man named Tobias who lived on the far side of town and rarely came out anymore, who had grown up on the road where the toll house stood and who, Frida said carefully, had never spoken easily about the old days, but had once told her that some injustices in this town had been buried alive rather than truly resolved. Leila went to see him the following afternoon. He was 91 years old and immediately sharp, and when she told him what she had found in the wall, he closed his eyes for a long moment and then opened them and said, in a voice that was very steady, "She told me she had done something like that. I was 17. I never forgot her." Tobias had been a neighbor's son when Antje lived at the toll house. He had known her briefly and clearly, in the way that young people sometimes know older people who have the quality of being completely themselves. He said she had not been afraid, exactly, but that she had been realistic in the way that careful people become when they understand what they are up against. She had told him once, in the weeks before she disappeared, that she was not leaving permanently, only strategically, and that the house would hold what it needed to hold until the right time. He had never told anyone this, because no one had ever asked the right questions. He gave Leila a photograph he had kept for 70 years, showing a woman standing in front of the stone building with the iron gate behind her. She was looking directly at the camera with an expression that Leila could only describe as patient. The legal process moved with the slow momentum of something large beginning to shift. Dagmar filed the initial documentation. Silvio provided certified historical records that corroborated the timeline. Tobias gave a formal statement. The land development company withdrew their representative without explanation. The legal firm with the familiar surname sent one more letter, then fell silent. Leila understood that silence in legal matters could mean many things. But in this case, she thought it most likely meant that someone had done the calculation and found the exposure too large to risk a public proceeding. The documents Antje had sealed in the wall were, as Dagmar had suspected, not just evidence of one fraud but a thread that, when pulled, connected to several others. On a morning several months after she had first walked through the iron gate with a canvas duffel bag and the most cautious kind of hope, Leila stood in the room she had repaired and looked at the wall where she had found the cavity. She had left that section of wall open, stone exposed, the hollow visible. She did not plan to fill it. It seemed important to leave evidence of the space where something true had been kept waiting. The legal proceedings would take more time. There were hearings scheduled, records to be examined, appeals to be processed. The outcome was not certain, but the direction was. Antje's journal and the deeds and letters she had preserved were part of the public record now, filed and documented and no longer hidden. Leila thought about what it meant to protect something by staying with it rather than running from it. She thought about the woman in the photograph, standing at the gate with that patient expression, and she thought about the fact that Antje had been right. The house had held what it needed to hold. The right person had come. She was not sure yet whether everything would resolve the way justice required, or whether the system would find a way to be slow enough to matter. But she was still there. The gate was repaired. The roof was solid. The stone walls stood the way they had always stood, thick and honest and indifferent to what anyone thought they deserved. She had come with $1 and a decision made from desperation, and she had found something that had been waiting with more patience than she had ever known. She did not feel, as she stood in that repaired room on that quiet morning, like someone who had been thrown away. She felt, for the first time in as long as she could remember, exactly like someone who had arrived.